Welcome back to Civil Wars. I'm William Spaniel, and this lecture is on the Unitary Actor assumption. It's something that I cover in Chapter 1 of The Rationality of War. You can find out more about that in the video description. In any case, in this first unit on bargaining and warfare, we are going to assume that individual groups within a state are unitary actors. And specifically, what that rules out is any sort of cleavage between leaders and their constituencies. So, for example, think about a rebel group with thousands and thousands and thousands of members. Those thousands and thousands and thousands of members are negotiating for some sort of good between themselves and a government of the state. Now, when they do that, they're going to be appointing a leader. The leader is going to be negotiating for the rebel group against the government. What's going to happen in these negotiations that we're going to be modeling is not the leaders acting biasedly. Rather, these leaders are going to act completely unbiasedly. They're going to ignore their own personal costs and benefits for war and instead look at the costs and benefits of war for their entire group. So the leaders are going to act to maximize group welfare and essentially be unbiased leaders. Why are we doing this? Well, there are three reasons why making the unitary actor assumption is a good idea. First, this is the hard case. War is very easy to understand and explain if leaders are just power-hungry jerks. If they are completely biased, they don't suffer very many costs of war, and their people do, the people that are in the group who appointed this person a leader. If those people are the ones that are actually suffering the costs and the leader is just getting benefits from warfare, it's very easy to explain why wars occur. Yet what we're going to be seeing is with unbiased leaders, war occurs anyway. So in this hard case where we have unbiased leaders, we still see war occurring. And that means that the prospects for peace aren't as easy as you might think. If you were to believe that what actually causes all wars are biased leaders, then the solution to that problem is to get rid of all bad leaders in this world, replace them with good leaders, and then peace will be guaranteed to prevail. And what we're going to be seeing by modeling using the unitary actor assumption, we're going to see that wars will not necessarily be solved that easily. In fact, you can have unbiased leaders and you can still get war anyway. So this is the hard case, and so we're going to show that even in the hard case, war still occurs. Second reason to do this is that by making the unitary actor assumption, you can adequately test a leader's honesty. If you look at what leaders say in the lead up to starting a war and trying to rally support for the war, they will never say things like, I'm going to start this war because our economy is really poor and I want to distract you from it. I'm a good wartime leader. I'm a terrible, terrible person when it comes to monetary policy. So to distract you from how bad I am at monetary policy, I'm going to start a war. Leaders never say that. What they do say, however, are things that appeal to this unitary actor assumption. They will say, war is in our best interest. It is a good idea for us as a people to fight this war. And the only way you can test a leader's honesty in this regard is to make this unitary actor assumption and see, will it be the case if this leader is acting unbiasedly as though he is the representative of a unitary actor of rebels or a unitary actor that represents the government, will that leader still be fighting wars in the same way that he's trying to claim that he should be fighting wars because this war is in our best interest? As a national interest. It's just something that we as a people should do. We're going to test the leader's honesty by using the unitary actor assumption. And the last thing that we're doing with the unitary actor assumption is, well, we're starting simple and branching out. We make simplifying assumptions about everything in our everyday lives, and that is not a bad thing. A lot of people think that making assumptions is bad. No, it's not. Making assumptions is a very good thing to do. And the reason that it's a good thing to do is that it makes complex problems tractable. If you tried thinking about everything that goes on in the world at any given moment, your brain would explode. There are too many moving parts for you to understand anything about the world at all. Now, in contrast, if you make a lot of assumptions at once, a whole bunch of assumptions, you end up with a very simple problem. And that very simple problem is easy for you to figure out. You can actually understand what happens in the simple case. And once you understand what goes on in the simple case, it's then easier to branch out and make less restrictive assumptions about the world and understand what goes on in that world that's having these fewer and fewer assumptions. So you start simple, you understand what's going on in the simple world, and then you branch out to more and more complex worlds. And at every step, you just relax one assumption at a time. You try to figure out what happens in this slightly more complex world and this slightly more complex world, and this slightly more complex world, and so forth. So by making this unitary actor assumption, we are starting with a very solid and easy to understand baseline, which is that you have unbiased leaders. And then from there, we can relax that assumption and try to figure out what's going to happen in a world where you don't have necessarily unbiased leaders. So making the unitary actor assumption is very good for that. Now, because we're talking about assumptions, I want to say something about when assumptions can be bad and when they aren't bad, and how not to criticize a model. A lot of people, when they first start playing around with models and seeing how models are used, will say, you know what, I don't like this model. This model is bad, and the reason it is bad is because it doesn't account for X. Having X is true about the world actually has this quality X, and so if we ignore this quality X in the model, we're not going to have a useful model. This model is going to be bad. And of course here, X is saying, well, in the real world, you actually do have biased leaders, and so by not having biased leaders in this model is bad. You should never, ever, ever make this complaint about a model. This is a bad way to criticize a model. First of all, this model is still useful, even if we don't have biased leaders, so we have completely unbiased leaders. Even if that's the case, the model is useful precisely because it tells us what happens in a world with unbiased leaders. And it's true that, every now and then we do have unbiased leaders in the world, and so the model is useful purely to discuss those cases. So it's not the case that the model is going to tell you everything about the world, and that's not what a model is supposed to do. A model is not supposed to tell you everything about everything. It's supposed to tell you about very simple, specific things. So having X not be in the model is good for talking about situations where X is not present. So you shouldn't be criticizing a model for not addressing something that the model is not intended to address. Lastly, we need to think about whether a particular assumption even matters for the model's results at all. Imagine someone made this complaint that X is not in the model, and because of that, the model is therefore bad. Well, suppose that we did include X, and the model said basically the exact same thing. Well, in that particular case, the model isn't actually telling you anything wrong, right? It doesn't matter if X is there or not. And so for that reason, it's actually better oftentimes to not have X in the model, because X is just going to complicate the results and not actually do anything meaningful. So if you're going to criticize a model like this, if you're going to criticize a model about a particular claim, about a particular missing assumption, not only say, hey, you know what, this model is missing this assumption, but also say, it's missing this assumption, and if we were to include it in the model, I think that the model's result would change for this reason, and this reason. That's the proper way to criticize a model. And don't get me wrong, we're going to be talking about what happens when we have biased leaders. That's going to happen. It's going to happen later in this course. But when we're starting off, we want to start off small and we want to build from there. So yes, we are going to have unitary actors. Yes, we are going to have unbiased leaders. And we're going to see that by making those assumptions about the world, we're actually going to have a lot of really neat and interesting things to say about why wars happen and why they don't happen. So that's the unitary actor assumption. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Take care.